The past she tried to forget is the one he could never overcome. They shared a love that was denied, stifled, forbidden even by memory. Now, they are locked in the same house, and only one of them will get out whole. If you enjoy stories of love and romance, watch until the very end and you won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and leave a comment telling us where you're listening to this beautiful story from. Let's continue. The March rain in Charleston always arrived without warning, like the memories Eleanor St. James tried to keep buried. She adjusted the tarp over her work materials while watching the uneven cobblestones of the colonial streets glisten under the water running down the slopes. At 37, her hands already knew the weight of history. They had returned color and life to dozens of works forgotten by time, restored colonial-era altars, and resurrected paintings that seemed lost forever. But nothing in her career had prepared her for Beaumont Manor. The great house rose imposingly on a hilltop, away from the bustle of the historic district, enveloped by vegetation that seemed to have conspired with time to hide its secrets. The majestic palmetto trees bent their fronds like tired arms, and Spanish moss draped the colonial walls with an almost aggressive insistence. It was as if nature itself were trying to protect the house from prying eyes. Eleanor took a deep breath, smelling the bittersweet scent of damp earth mixed with the aroma of wildflowers sprouting between the stones. There was something familiar about the place, a feeling she couldn't explain, as if she had already dreamed of these terraced gardens and the dark wooden windows that seemed to watch her from the upper floors. Her mother's letter, yellowed with age, remained tucked away in the leather bag she always carried. 20 years after Helen St. James's death, that piece of paper still held mysteries Eleanor had never had the courage to investigate. A letter intercepted when she was 18, hidden for years, discovered only the previous year among the belongings left by the aunt who had raised her. Whispered words about the Beaumont name, about an impossible love, about secrets that could destroy entire families. "You must be Eleanor St. James." The deep voice sounded behind her, not as a question but as a confirmation. She turned slowly, and it felt as if the ground shifted beneath her feet. Vincent Beaumont stood there, just a few feet away, with the erect posture of a man born to command, but his eyes were heavy with an exhaustion that seemed too old for his 42 years. His dark hair, slightly grey at the temples, was tousled by the wind, and he wore a white linen shirt that contrasted with his sun-kissed coastal skin. For a moment that seemed to stretch for minutes, they looked at each other in silence. Eleanor felt her heart race in a way no logic could explain. It was as if a part of her long dormant had violently awakened. Her hands trembled imperceptibly as she clutched the strap of her bag. She began, but her voice came out hoarse. She cleared her throat and tried again. I'm here for the restoration." Vincent nodded slowly, his eyes never leaving her face. There was something in his expression that Eleanor couldn't decipher. Recognition, surprise, and something deeper, more dangerous. 20 years, he murmured, more to himself than to her. "I'm sorry?" Eleanor frowned, feeling a shiver run down her spine. "Nothing." Vincent stepped closer, and she could smell the masculine scent that emanated from him, a mixture of wood, sea, and something indefinable that made her want to both step closer and run away. "Welcome to Beaumont Manor, Miss St. James." The way he pronounced her name sounded far too intimate, as if he had said it 1,000 times before. Eleanor swallowed hard, trying to maintain her professional composure. "I need to examine the areas requiring restoration," she said, straightening her shoulders. "You mentioned on the phone that there are wall paintings damaged by humidity and some architectural elements in need of urgent intervention." "There is much more than that in this house," Vincent replied, his dark eyes never leaving her face. "Much more than any technical report could ever describe." He turned and began walking toward the main entrance, his strides long and purposeful. Eleanor followed, noticing the way he moved, with the confidence of someone who knew every stone of this place, every shadow, every secret. The interior of the manor was even more impressive than she had imagined. The soaring ceilings created ghostly echoes, and the light, filtering through the colonial windows, cast golden patterns on the wooden floor. The walls were decorated with 18th-century paintings depicting bucolic scenes and Baroque angels, but many showed clear signs of deterioration. Damp stains spread like open wounds, and in some places the paint had peeled away completely. "The manor has been in the family for 200 years, Vincent explained as they walked through the main hall. Each generation added something, changed something, sometimes for the better, other times. He paused, running his hand over a dark stain on the wall. Other times trying to hide what should have remained visible. Eleanor approached one of the paintings, taking a small flashlight from her bag to examine the details. It was a female-faced angel with sad eyes and golden tears that seemed to stream down the canvas. The technique was extraordinary, but the humidity had created bubbles in the paint, and mold was beginning to form in the corners. "This is magnificent," she murmured, genuinely impressed. "The technique is reminiscent of the colonial masters of the Carolinas. Who painted it?" "My great-great-grandmother," Vincent replied, positioning himself right behind her, so close she could feel the heat of his body. "They say she was inspired by someone she loved but could not have." Eleanor felt a chill run down her neck. There was something in his voice, a restrained intensity that made her want to both step away and draw closer. "Impossible love," she commented, trying to keep her tone professional. "A recurring theme in art throughout the ages." "Recurring," Vincent repeated, and she could hear a bitter smile in his voice. "Perhaps because some things are inevitable, no matter how many centuries pass." She turned to face him, and again she was struck by that disconcerting sense of familiarity. There was something in his eyes that reminded her of, but the memory slipped away before she could grasp it. "Are you sure we've never met before?" The words escaped before she could stop them. Vincent stood motionless for a few seconds, as if weighing how much of the truth he could reveal. "A party," he said finally. "A long time ago. You were wearing a blue dress and laughing at something your date had said." The memory hit Eleanor like a punch to the gut. The law school graduation party at Emory University in Atlanta. She'd been 17, accompanying her older boyfriend, a final-year student. She vaguely remembered locking eyes with a tall, dark-haired young man who had watched her from the dance floor with an intensity that had made her uncomfortable and strangely thrilled at the same time. "You remember," Vincent observed, noticing the recognition in her eyes. "Vaguely," she lied, because to remember meant admitting that his gaze had haunted her for years, appearing in sporadic dreams she could never explain. "I haven't forgotten," he said simply. "Not for a single day." The ensuing silence was thick, charged with a dangerous electricity. Eleanor knew she should say something professional, get back to the restoration, but the words seemed to have fled her mind. It was Vincent who broke the moment. "I have a proposal," he said, his voice resuming a more formal tone, though his eyes remained intense. "The restoration this house needs cannot be done in a few weeks. It will take at least 2 months, maybe 3. Eleanor nodded. She had already imagined as much upon seeing the state of the paintings. "But," Vincent continued, "there are specific conditions." She raised her eyebrows, waiting. "During the restoration period, you will stay here, at the manor. The house is large, there are plenty of rooms, and you will have full access to all areas that need work." He paused, his eyes never leaving hers. "With a few exceptions." "What kind of exceptions?" "The room on the top floor remains locked. Always." His voice hardened. "And there are other rules. Every evening you will dine with me. It is not a request. It is a condition." Eleanor felt a mixture of indignation and curiosity. "That's unusual," she said, choosing her words carefully. "I usually have more freedom in my work." "This is not a usual job," Vincent replied. "This house is not usual, and I—" He hesitated for a fraction of a second. "I am not a usual client." There was something in his voice that sounded almost like a warning. Eleanor studied his face, searching for signs of his true intentions. "Why the rules?" she asked. "Because there are things in this house you need to learn gradually, truths that cannot be revealed all at once." He took another step closer. "And because I have been waiting 20 years for this opportunity." "What opportunity?" "To talk to you, really talk. Eleanor felt her heart race again. There was something dangerous about this man, something that awakened primal instincts she had long since learned to control. But there was also a vulnerability hidden behind that authoritative posture, a pain she recognized because she carried a similar one herself. "And if I refuse the conditions?" Vincent smiled, but it was a humorless smile. "Then you will be just another restorer who passed through and couldn't finish the job." He paused. "Like all the others." "Others?" "5, in the last 3 years. They all either refused the conditions or gave up after a few days." His eyes glinted with something that could have been defiance or desperation. "Will you be different?" Eleanor looked around at the damaged paintings, at the weeping angels that seemed to beg for salvation. She thought of her mother's letter, of the mysteries she had carried for so many years, of the strange feeling of finally being in the right place. "2 conditions of my own," she said finally. Vincent raised his eyebrows, clearly surprised. "First, my work cannot be interfered with. When I am restoring, I do not want to be interrupted." She lifted her chin, adopting a challenging posture. "Second, if at any point I decide I want to leave, you will not try to stop me." "Agreed," he replied without hesitation, "but there is a 3rd condition of mine that I haven't mentioned yet." Eleanor waited, her heart beating faster and faster. "At the end of 30 days, I will tell you everything. About Isadora, about what really happened in this house, about why you are here." He took another step, and now he was so close she could see the small scars on his hands, probably from years of working with risky investments and decisions that cut like blades. "And you will tell me about the letter you carry in your bag." Eleanor turned pale. "How did you—" "Because I know exactly who Helen St. James was." His voice dropped, almost to a whisper. "And I know you are here for much more than just a job." The world seemed to spin around Eleanor. Her legs grew weak and she had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. "You knew my mother?" "Every Beaumont knew Helen St. James," Vincent said, and there was a deep sadness in his voice. "She was important to our family, in a way that changed everything." Eleanor closed her eyes, feeling the pieces of a puzzle she didn't even know existed begin to fall into place in her mind. "Do you accept the conditions?" Vincent asked. When she opened her eyes, he was looking at her with an intensity that made her tremble. "I accept," she whispered. Vincent extended his right hand. "Then let's be formal. 30 days." Eleanor looked at his hand, strong, with long fingers and a few small scars, yet elegant. For a moment she hesitated. She knew instinctively that shaking that hand would mean much more than a professional agreement. It would mean entering a game whose rules she did not fully understand, but her entire life had been a search for answers no one seemed willing to give, and here was a man promising truths, even if they came wrapped in danger. She extended her hand and touched his. The electric contact was immediate and devastating. Vincent intertwined his fingers with hers for a few seconds longer than necessary for a simple handshake, and Eleanor felt a warm current run through her entire body. "Are your things in the car?" he asked, not letting go of her hand. "Yes," she managed to reply, though her voice sounded strange to her own ears. "Marcus will get them. You'll be in the blue room on the 2nd floor." He finally released her hand, but his eyes remained fixed on hers. "Dinner is served at 8. Don't be late." It wasn't an invitation, it was an order. Eleanor nodded, still dazed by the whirlwind of emotions the simple touch had awakened. "One last thing," Vincent said, taking a few steps back. "This house has a memory of its own. Sometimes you will hear things, see shadows, feel presences. They are not ghosts, they are just echoes of everything that has ever happened here." "What kind of things?" Vincent smiled, but this time the smile reached his eyes, making him devastatingly attractive. "You'll find out, just as you will find out that some love stories are so powerful they transcend time." He turned to leave, but stopped and looked over his shoulder. "And some stories of pain, too." And then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone in the hall, surrounded by weeping angels and dancing shadows, with her heart pounding erratically, and the certainty that her life would never be the same. The night wind swept through the palmetto trees, and for the first time in 20 years, Beaumont Manor seemed to awaken from a deep sleep. The blue room on the second floor of the manor was a contradiction of elegance and melancholy. The walls, lined with cobalt blue Portuguese tiles, contrasted with dark rosewood furniture, and a large window offered a privileged view of the Charleston Bay. Eleanor placed her leather suitcase on the canopy bed and took a deep breath, trying to process everything that had happened in the last few hours. Her hands still tingled where Vincent had touched them. It was impossible to ignore the magnetic attraction she felt for this man, even knowing there was something dangerous in his intensity. There were secrets in his eyes, pain hidden behind that mask of absolute control. She took her mother's letter from her bag and carefully unfolded it on the side table. Helen St. James's delicate handwriting danced before her eyes, filled with words she had memorized, but which now took on new meanings. My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, it means you have finally found the courage to seek the truth about your origins. The Beaumont name should not be foreign to you, for it is a part of who you are, even if they tried to erase our existence from their privileged lives. A soft knock on the door interrupted her reading. Miss St. James. The woman's voice from outside was polite, but carried a poorly disguised curiosity. Eleanor opened the door to find a woman of about 50, with grey hair tied in a low bun, wearing a simple but immaculate uniform. I'm Dolores, she said, offering a genuine smile. I've been managing the house for 15 years. I came to see if you need anything. Thank you, Dolores. I'm settled in nicely. But Dolores didn't move. Her eyes quickly scanned the room, noticing the open letter on the table, before returning to Eleanor's face. May I ask an indiscreet question, ma'am? Eleanor nodded, intrigued. Are you Helen St. James's daughter? Eleanor's heart leaped. You knew my mother. Dolores stepped into the room and gently closed the door behind her. I was very young when she worked here, but I remember her perfectly. She was luminous, and the older gentleman, Mr. Vincent's father, was completely in love with her. Dolores lowered her voice. Everyone knew, but no one talked about it. My mother worked here. As a restorer, just like you, she came to restore the paintings in the main hall, but ended up staying for almost a year. Dolores walked to the window, looking out at the bay. When they found out about the pregnancy, there was a terrible scandal. Mrs. Beaumont threatened to kill herself. The press got wind of the story. Eleanor felt her legs weaken. Her worst suspicions were being confirmed. And my mother. She left overnight. We never saw her again. Dolores turned to face her, her eyes shining with a mixture of sadness and restrained anger. But Mr. Vincent always knew. Since he was a child, he would ask about Helen, about the baby she took away. I think that's why he's never been able to truly care for any other woman. The weight of this revelation crushed Eleanor like an avalanche. Vincent wasn't just someone who had known her mother. He had always known she was his sister. Dolores, she managed to whisper, are you saying that you're siblings? Dolores shook her head. No, Mr. Vincent was born 2 years before your mother arrived here. But he grew up, knowing that somewhere out there was a little girl who could have been his sister, the daughter of the man he called father. Eleanor sat down heavily on the bed, trying to organize her thoughts. Why are you telling me this? Because this family has suffered enough from secrets. Dolores came closer and placed a hand on Eleanor's shoulder. And because you have the right to know before you get emotionally involved with Mr. Vincent. I'm not. Yes, you are. I saw the way you looked at each other this afternoon. It's the same way Helen and his father used to look at each other. Dolores sighed deeply. I just hope this time the story has a different ending. After Dolores left, Eleanor remained alone with her turbulent thoughts until the afternoon shadows turned into night. The sound of distant bells echoed across the bay, marking 8 o'clock. Dinner time. She chose a simple moss-green dress and descended the wooden staircase that creaked softly under her feet. The manor at night took on a completely different atmosphere. More intimate, more mysterious. Strategically placed candles created a play of light and shadow that turned every hallway into a scene from a dramatic opera. Vincent was waiting for her in the dining room, wearing a navy blue dress shirt that highlighted his dark eyes. He stood up as she entered, a gesture of chivalry that contrasted with the informality of their recent encounters. "I hope the room is to your liking," he said, pulling out a chair for her to sit. "It's perfect." Eleanor accepted the seat he offered, consciously ignoring the masculine scent that enveloped her as he drew near. Dolores was very helpful. Vincent sat across from her, and she noticed a subtle tension in his shoulders. "Dolores talks too much," he commented, pouring red wine into both glasses. "I hope she didn't bore you with old stories." "On the contrary, she told me some very enlightening things." Vincent paused the movement of the bottle in midair, his eyes meeting hers. "Enlightening how?" "About my mother, about her work here." Eleanor picked up her glass and took a sip, feeling the full-bodied wine warm her from the inside. "About you." "What specifically about me?" "That you always knew who I was." Vincent placed the bottle on the table with more force than necessary. "And does that change anything?" "It changes everything." Eleanor leaned forward slightly. "It means this meeting is no coincidence. You sought me out deliberately." "I did," he admitted without hesitation. "For years." The raw honesty of his answer surprised her. "Why?" Vincent leaned back in his chair, studying her face with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "Because since I was a child, I knew there was a part of my family's story that was being denied to me. My father died when I was 22, taking his secrets to the grave. My mother refused to speak about Helen St. James." He swirled the glass between his fingers, watching the golden liquid reflect the candlelight. "But I remembered her, vaguely, and most of all I remembered how my father changed after she left." "How did he change?" "He became colder, more distant, as if a part of him had been torn away." Vincent took a long sip of wine. Until the day he died, he would murmur her name in his sleep. Eleanor felt a pang of sadness for the father she had never known. "And you believe that I am his daughter?" "Yes." Vincent did not look away. "You have his eyes, the same way you tilt your head when you're concentrating, the same way you touch things as if you want to understand their soul." The silence that followed was filled only by the distant sound of waves breaking on the marina rocks. "Why didn't you look for me sooner?" Eleanor finally asked. "Because before you weren't ready for the truths I have to tell." Vincent stood and walked to the window, watching the lights of the colonial city twinkle in the distance. "And because I myself was not ready to face what your presence would awaken." "And what does my presence awaken?" He turned, to face her, and there was something wild in his eyes. Things that should have remained buried. Before Eleanor could respond, Marcus, the employee who had retrieved her luggage, entered with the first course. It was a grilled sea bass with vegetables, prepared simply but elegantly. "Marcus has been taking care of the property for 20 years, Vincent explained, returning to the table. "He knew your mother too." "It seems the entire estate is conspiring to tell me about my family," Eleanor observed with an ironic smile. "This house holds memories like a treasure chest," Vincent replied. "Some precious, others dangerous." They ate in relative silence for a few minutes, but the tension between them was palpable. Eleanor found herself watching his hands as he cut his fish, noticing the precision of his movements, the restrained strength in his fingers. "Tell me about Isadora," she said suddenly. Vincent stopped eating, his fork suspended in midair. "Why do you want to know about her?" "Because Dolores mentioned there was a tragedy, and because there's a locked room on the top floor you've forbidden me to enter." Vincent placed his cutlery on the plate and looked at her directly. "Isadora was my fiancée, the daughter of a traditional New York family, destined since childhood to marry me to unite two financial empires." His voice was controlled, but there was a deep pain behind the words. She was beautiful, intelligent, raised to be the perfect wife. "And did you love her?" "I tried." The answer came out like a sigh. "God knows I tried." "But—" Vincent stood up again, this time walking to the fireplace where a low fire crackled. "But the heart doesn't obey logic. It doesn't obey family contracts or social conveniences." He rested his hands on the mantelpiece, the muscles, in his back tense under his shirt. Isadora realized I would never be truly hers. And what happened? She discovered the truth. What truth? Vincent turned slowly, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. That I was in love with a woman I had met only once, at a university party 20 years ago. His voice dropped to almost a whisper. A woman in a blue dress who laughed with such freedom that it made my world stop turning. Eleanor felt the air leave her lungs. Vincent, Isadora found papers, investigations I had conducted to try and find her. She discovered I had hired detectives, searched universities, followed every lead about Helen St. James and her daughter. He walked back to the table, but didn't sit. The night she died, Isadora confronted me. She said she would rather die than live married to a man who dreamed of another. She killed herself. She jumped from the balcony of the top-floor room, right in front of me. Vincent closed his eyes, as if trying to push the image away. The last words she said were that she hoped I would never find the woman I was obsessed with, because when I did, I would discover that unrequited love was less painful than impossible love. Eleanor rose from her chair, her legs trembling. Why did she say it would be impossible? Because she knew who you were. Vincent opened his eyes and stared at her with a devastating intensity. She knew you were most likely my sister on my father's side. Eleanor's world collapsed. The floor seemed to move beneath her feet, and she had to lean on the table to keep from falling. No, she whispered. All the evidence points to it, Eleanor. Vincent approached but kept a respectful distance. The dates, the circumstances, the physical resemblance. No, she repeated louder this time. This can't be happening. Why do you think I fought this feeling for so long? Why do you think I spent 20 years trying to forget you? His voice was laden with pain. Because from the moment I discovered who you were, I knew that loving you would be my undoing. Eleanor felt hot tears stream down her face. Then why did you bring me here? Why risk us seeing each other again? Vincent took another step toward her, and now he was so close she could see the fine lines around his eyes. Because I discovered something that changes everything. What? That there are documents proving your biological father is not who I thought he was. He reached out, as if to touch her face, but restrained himself. That your mother lied to protect you, but the truth is even more complicated than anyone imagined. Eleanor stared at him through her tears, feeling her world rebuilding and falling apart at the same time. What documents? They're in my father's study, in a safe I only managed to open last month. Vincent finally touched her face, wiping away a tear with his thumb. I'll show you everything tomorrow. His touch sent electric currents through her body, and Eleanor found herself torn between relief and a terror she couldn't name. And if the documents confirm we are siblings. Vincent smiled, but it was a sad, resigned smile. Then we will spend the rest of our lives fighting the most powerful feeling I have ever experienced. He removed his hand from her face, but his eyes remained locked on hers. But if they confirm the opposite, what? Then we will discover that fate is sometimes crueler and more generous than we ever dared to imagine. That night, Eleanor lay awake until the early hours of the morning, gazing out the window of the blue room at the moonlit bay. Vincent's words echoed in her mind, mixing with fragmented memories of her mother and the growing certainty that her life was about to change irreversibly. Somewhere in the manor, she could have sworn she heard footsteps in the hallway, whispers coming from the walls, echoes of old conversations that seemed to float between the rooms like restless ghosts. The house had a memory of its own, Vincent had said, and that memory was awakening, bringing with it secrets that had waited decades for the right person to be revealed. Eleanor touched her mother's letter, which she always kept close, and murmured a silent prayer. She no longer knew if she was praying to discover the truth or for the strength to bear it. But one thing she knew for sure, there was no turning back. She was hopelessly entangled in this web of mysteries, passions and revelations that could either destroy her or set her free forever. And deep in her heart, a part of her ardently wished that the documents in the study's safe would confirm that she and Vincent did not share blood, because as wrong as it might be, She could no longer deny that she was falling in love with the man who could be her brother. The thought both terrified and thrilled her in equal measure, and she knew there would be no peace in her soul until she discovered the whole truth. Augustus Beaumont's study had remained untouched since his death 15 years earlier. Vincent opened the heavy velvet curtains, allowing the golden morning light to flood the room laden with memories. Eleanor followed, him in silence, still processing everything she had discovered the night before. The walls were lined with mahogany bookshelves, filled with volumes on economics, law, and American history. The smell of old leather and cigars mingled with the scent of aged wood, creating an atmosphere that seemed to freeze time. Behind the imposing desk, a portrait of Augustus Beaumont watched over the room with penetrating eyes that were painfully reminiscent of Vincent's. He was a complex man, Vincent said, noticing Eleanor's fixed gaze on the portrait. Brilliant in business, but completely lost when it came to emotions. Eleanor approached the painting, studying every feature of the paternal face she had never known. There was a severity in Augustus's eyes, but also a deep melancholy that felt familiar. "Are you sure that I am his daughter?" Vincent stood beside her, so close she could feel the heat emanating from his body. "Until yesterday I was certain. Today, after what I found..." He paused. "Today I don't know anything anymore." Vincent walked to a wooden panel that seemed merely decorative but revealed a secret entrance when he pressed a specific sequence of carvings. Behind the panel, an old safe awaited, already open. "I managed to figure out the combination 2 weeks ago," he explained, removing a leather folder from inside. "It was your mother's date of birth." Eleanor felt a shiver run down her spine. He kept her birth date in his memory. Apparently, he kept a lot more than that. Vincent placed the folder on the desk and opened it carefully. The first document he took out was a birth certificate, Eleanor's, but it was different from the one she had always known. "This can't be," she whispered, taking the paper with trembling hands. There, in the space for the father's name, was a name she had never seen before, Edward Miller Smith. "Keep looking," Vincent said softly. There were other documents, letters, photographs, receipts for bank transfers, and at the bottom of the folder, a sealed envelope addressed to Eleanor St. James, to be opened only when she discovers the truth. With trembling fingers, Eleanor broke the seal. The letter was written in her mother's familiar hand. "My dearest daughter, if you are reading this, it means you have finally discovered that not everything I told you about your father was true. Forgive me for this lie, but it was the only way I could find to protect you from an even more complicated reality. Edward Miller Smith was your real father. He was the great love of my life before I met Augustus Beaumont. Edward was an artist, poor, a dreamer, everything my family considered unsuitable for a young woman from a good family. When I found out I was pregnant, my parents forced me to end the relationship and invented the story that you were another man's child to avoid a scandal. It was then that I met Augustus. He was in love with me, offered to marry me and raise you as his legitimate daughter. For a few months I believed that could be a solution for everyone, but I discovered I couldn't live a lie of that magnitude. Edward died in a car accident 2 weeks before you were born, never knowing he was going to be a father. Augustus was devastated when I told him the truth, not because you weren't his child, but because he realized I would never love him the way he desired. When you were born, he wanted to officially adopt you, give you the Beaumont name, ensure you had all the privileges an heiress deserved. But I couldn't accept. I knew that growing up in that environment would mean living a perpetual lie. I left with you, but Augustus never stopped sending money. Every school tuition, every book you received, every opportunity you had, it was all secretly funded by him, not out of obligation but out of genuine love for the daughter he wished he'd had. Vincent grew up knowing this story. Augustus told him everything when he turned 18. Hoping that one day he might find you and tell you the truth, I hope that knowing this you can understand the choices I made. And I hope most of all that you find true love, the kind I had with Edward and that Augustus had for me, but which circumstances did not allow to flourish. With all my love and my apologies, Helen St. James. Eleanor finished reading with tears streaming freely down her face. Vincent came closer and, without a word, wrapped her in his arms. She let herself be held, smelling the masculine scent that was beginning to feel familiar, the warmth of his chest against her face. "We're not siblings," she whispered against his shirt. "No," he confirmed, his voice hoarse with emotion. "But that doesn't make things any less complicated." Eleanor pulled back slightly to look at him. "Why?" "Because now you know I was raised knowing of your existence, that my obsession with you didn't start at that party. It started when I was a teenager, listening to my father talk about Helen St. James and her daughter." Vincent gently caressed her face. "Doesn't that make me a stalker? Someone who sought you out not for love, but for a fixation?" Eleanor studied his eyes, looking for signs of imbalance or unhealthy obsession. But all she saw was vulnerability, a fear of having his feelings rejected. "Did you bring me here to kidnap me, to force me to stay?" "No." "Did you ever try to control or manipulate me before we met?" "Never. I just knew where you were. Always." "And how is that different from genuine interest?" Vincent smiled for the first time since they had entered the study. "Perhaps it's not so different after all." She moved closer, placing her hands on his chest. "Vincent, I felt something the first time our eyes met, at that party 20 years ago. Something I couldn't explain or forget." She paused, gathering her courage. "If there's something wrong with two adults being attracted to each other, even if that attraction has roots in the past, then all love is problematic. Are you sure about what you're saying?" In response, Eleanor rose onto her tiptoes and touched her lips to his. It was a soft, experimental kiss, charged with 20 years of unrecognized expectation. Vincent stood still for a few seconds, as if he couldn't believe it was happening. Then his arms closed around her, and he deepened the kiss with a passion that spoke of years of forced restraint. When they broke apart, they were both breathing unevenly. "Eleanor," he whispered against her lips, "you don't understand what you're doing to me." "Then explain it to me." Instead of answering with words, Vincent pressed her against the bookshelf, their bodies aligning perfectly. Eleanor could feel the intensity of his desire through their clothes, the way his hands trembled slightly as they explored her hair. "For years I dreamed of this moment," he confessed, his voice husky, "but I never imagined it would be like this. I never imagined you would be real." "I am real," she replied, letting her own hands explore the defined muscles under his shirt. "And I'm here." They kissed again, this time with more urgency. Vincent lifted her onto the desk, positioning himself between her legs, and Eleanor felt as if every cell in her body were on fire. Her hands found the buttons of his shirt, but before they could go further, the sound of footsteps in the hall made them break apart abruptly. "Mr. Vincent?" Marcus's voice echoed from outside. "There's an urgent phone call." Vincent closed his eyes, clearly struggling to regain control. "Tell them I'll call back," he replied without moving away from Eleanor. "It's the police, sir, about the investigation into Miss Isadora." The mood in the room shifted instantly. Vincent moved away from Eleanor as if he had been punched. "The investigation has been reopened?" Eleanor asked, adjusting her clothes. "It was never officially closed." Vincent ran his hands through his hair, messing it up. "Isadora's family never accepted suicide as the definitive explanation. They believe you. That I killed her, yes." He walked to the door. "I need to take this call." "Vincent, wait." He stopped but didn't turn around. "What happened in the top floor? Room? The whole truth?" Vincent remained silent for long seconds. "Isadora found out I was in love with you. That night, she said she'd rather die than live knowing I would never love her. I tried to calm her down, said we could try to build something real, but—" His voice broke. "She said she had already done something to ensure I would never have you." "What had she done?" "I don't know. She jumped before I could ask." Vincent finally turned, and his eyes were tormented. "But I suspect it has something to do with your arrival here." "What do you mean?" "Think about it, Eleanor. Of all the restorers in the country, why were you specifically contacted for this job?" The realization hit Eleanor like a lightning bolt. You didn't look for me. I was directed to you. Exactly. And that scares me more than any police investigation. Vincent left the study, leaving Eleanor alone with the documents scattered on the desk and a new set of unanswered questions. She gathered her mother's letters, feeling as if she had finally found a part of herself that had been lost for years. But the satisfaction of knowing the truth about her parentage was quickly overshadowed by concern over Vincent's revelations. If Isadora had orchestrated some plan before she died, if she had ensured that Eleanor and Vincent would meet, what were her true intentions? Was it a posthumous attempt to unite two hearts destined for each other, or an elaborate revenge designed to destroy them? Eleanor left the study and went up to her room, but she stopped on the second floor when she noticed one of the hallway doors was ajar. It was a room she hadn't noticed before, decorated entirely in shades of pink and gold. She gently pushed the door open and entered. It was clearly a woman's bedroom, with delicate furniture and framed photographs on the dresser. Eleanor approached the photographs and felt a chill run down her spine. They all showed the same woman, blonde, elegant, with classic beauty, at various moments in her life. In some she was alone, in others with Vincent, but in all of them there was something in her eyes that seemed artificial, forced. Isadora. She was beautiful, a voice said from behind her. Eleanor turned quickly to see Dolores at the door. This was her room? When she stayed here? Yes, but she rarely slept here. Dolores entered the room and began adjusting objects that apparently didn't need adjusting. She preferred hotels in the city, said the house was haunted. Haunted how? She heard voices, saw shadows that shouldn't be there. Dolores picked up one of the photographs, especially after she found out about you. Dolores, do you know how I was contacted for this job? The older woman became visibly uncomfortable. I know you received a referral, didn't you? From whom? That I cannot say. Cannot or will not. Dolores put the photograph back and looked directly at Eleanor. Miss Eleanor, there are forces in this house that are bigger than any of us. Forces that have their own intentions. She lowered her voice. If they brought you here, it was for a reason. I just hope it was for a good one. What kind of forces? The same ones that make the doors creak without a wind, that move objects during the night, that whisper names in the hallways. Dolores walked to the door. Your mother felt these presences too. She said the house was trying to tell her something important, and did she find out what it was? She did, and she left 2 days later. Dolores left the room, leaving Eleanor alone with the photographs of Isadora and a growing sense that her arrival at Beaumont Manor had been orchestrated by forces she was only beginning to comprehend. That afternoon, she tried to focus on restoring the paintings in the main hall, but her thoughts kept returning to the kiss she had shared with Vincent, his hands in her hair, the taste of his lips, the promise of intimacy that had been left unfulfilled. But she also thought about the police investigation that could destroy any chance they had of being together, and about Dolores's enigmatic words about inexplicable forces that inhabited the house. When Vincent returned, it was already evening. Eleanor saw him arrive through the hall window, noticing the tension in his shoulders, the way he walked as if carrying the weight of the world. How was the call? She asked when he came inside. Complicated. Vincent approached her, observing her work on the paintings. They found some letters in Isadora's apartment in New York, letters that mention you. Eleanor stopped cleaning the painting and looked at him. What kind of mentions? Detailed plans, to ensure you two would meet. Investigations into your life, your career, even your financial needs. Vincent ran a hand over his face, looking exhausted. She had planned everything for months, Eleanor. Even the referral you received to come work here. Why would she do that? We don't know, but the police want to question you. Eleanor felt the ground shift beneath her feet again. Do they think I was involved in her death? They think you might know more than you realize about her motivations. Vincent came closer and took her hands. Eleanor, I need you to tell me. Have you ever heard the name Isadora Montclair before coming here? Never. Are you sure? Think carefully. Any client, any friend, any professional reference. Eleanor closed her eyes, searching her memory. She began, then stopped. A vague memory surfaced. A few months ago, I received a call from a woman who said she was interested in hiring my services. She asked a lot of questions about my experience, my methods, even about my family. Did she identify herself? She said her name was Anna. Eleanor opened her eyes, a terrible realization dawning on her. But there was something familiar about her voice, and she knew details about my work that only someone who knew me personally could know. Vincent closed his eyes, as if in physical pain. Isadora knew you were the woman I was obsessed with. She had conducted investigations, had photographs of you, knew your life better than you can imagine. He opened his eyes and stared at her with an intensity that made her tremble. And for some reason only she knew, she decided to make sure we met. But why? If she loved you, why would she facilitate our meeting? That's the question that's terrifying. Me, Vincent replied, because I know Isadora well enough to know she would never do anything that could make me happy, unless it also guaranteed my destruction. That night, Eleanor stayed in the Blue Room trying to process everything she had discovered. The revelations about her parentage had been a relief, but now she found herself involved in something much larger and more sinister than she had ever imagined. She and Vincent were not siblings. They were free to love each other, but they were trapped in a web created by a dead woman who had apparently orchestrated their meeting, for reasons neither of them fully understood. And somewhere in that mysterious manner, the forces Dolores had mentioned seemed to move in the shadows, whispering secrets that were not yet ready to be revealed. Eleanor touched her lips, remembering the kiss she had shared with Vincent. She knew there was no turning back. She was hopelessly in love with him. But she also knew that their story was just beginning, and that the most dangerous revelations were yet to come. Outside, the night wind made the palmettos whisper like ancient voices, and Eleanor had the strange feeling that Isadora Montclair was still present in that house, watching, waiting, preparing the next move in a game she had started even before she died. The arrival of Detective Paul H. Martin at Beaumont Manor the next morning brought with it an atmosphere of tension that seemed to permeate every corner of the colonial house. Vincent received him in the living room with the controlled posture of a man accustomed to facing adversity, but Eleanor could see the rigidity in his shoulders, the way his hands discreetly clenched into fists. "Mr. Beaumont," the detective greeted formally, a middle-aged man with graying hair and shrewd eyes that seemed to catalogue every detail of the room. "Miss St. James, thank you for agreeing to see us." Eleanor nodded, trying to maintain her composure despite the nervousness growing in her stomach. She had spent a sleepless night mentally replaying every strange phone call she had received in recent months, every professional contact who seemed to know more about her life than they should have. "The letters we found in Miss Montclair's New York apartment are revealing," the detective continued, opening a folder on the coffee table. "She had documented the movements of you both with impressive detail." The first letter he showed was written in Isadora's elegant handwriting dated 6 months before her death. "Vincent has never loved me," Eleanor read aloud, the words leaping from the page like accusations. "He is obsessed with a ghost, a woman he met for a few seconds 20 years ago. I found out who she is. Eleanor St. James, the illegitimate daughter of Helen St. James, the woman who destroyed this family long before I came along." Vincent abruptly rose from the armchair, walking to the window. His back was stiff, and Eleanor could see the tension radiating from every muscle. "Continue," the detective instructed, closely observing both their reactions. "I will make sure they meet," Eleanor read, a shiver running down her spine. "I will give Vincent exactly what he has always wanted. And when he discovers that the love he has idealized for so long is just an illusion, when he realizes that reality never lives up to fantasy, he will understand what he did to me. He will know what it's like to love someone who can never love him back." "There's more," the detective said, turning the page. "This one is from 2 weeks before her death. The plan is working perfectly. Eleanor took the bait of the professional referral I created through the art gallery in New York. She will come to Charleston next month. Vincent has no idea what I have prepared for him. When he discovers that she is just like me, ambitious, self-serving, capable of using her charm to get what she wants, he will finally understand why he could never love me. Because he is programmed to fall in love with women who will make him suffer. Eleanor felt as if she had been slapped. "That's not true," she said, her voice louder than she intended. "I'm not like that. I would never—" "We know you're not," Vincent said softly, turning from the window. "That was Isadora's distorted interpretation of you, based on the investigations she commissioned." "What kind of investigations?" the detective asked. Vincent sat down again but kept his distance from Eleanor. Isadora hired a private investigator to find out everything about Eleanor's life, her past relationships, her financial situation, her clients, even her personal preferences. He paused, running a hand through his hair. She interpreted every financial difficulty Eleanor faced as evidence of greed, every failed relationship as proof of emotional coldness, and based on these misinterpretations, she decided to orchestrate your meeting, so that I would discover, in her words, the true nature of the woman I idealized, Vincent confirmed. The detective leaned forward, studying both their faces. "But something went wrong with her plan. You actually fell in love." It wasn't a question, but an observation. Eleanor felt heat rise to her face and avoided looking directly at Vincent. "That's recent," she admitted. "Did Isadora find out the plan had failed?" "The night she died," Vincent answered, his voice growing quieter. "She saw me looking at Eleanor during a dinner, saw the way I watched her, how I shielded her with my body when other men approached. She realized that far from disillusioning me, Eleanor had confirmed everything I had always felt. And that's when she decided to kill herself. She said she would rather die knowing she had tried to separate us than live to see her plan fail." Vincent closed his eyes, as if trying to push away the memory. Her last words were that she still had an ace up her sleeve. Something that would ensure our happiness was impossible. Eleanor felt a cold knot in her stomach. "What ace up her sleeve?" "We don't know," the detective replied, "but we found more letters. Letters she wrote but never sent, addressed to specific people. One of them is for you, Miss St. James." He handed a sealed envelope to Eleanor. She opened it with trembling hands, her face paling as she read. "Dear Eleanor," she read aloud, her voice shaking, "if you are reading this, it means my plan to separate you from Vincent failed, and I had to take more drastic measures. You may believe you love him, but there are things about him you don't know. There is a disease that runs in the veins of the Beaumont men, something he has inherited that will change everything between you. Ask him about the episodes. Ask about the medication he hides. Ask why he never wanted to truly marry, why he always keeps an emotional distance from any woman. When you discover the truth, you will understand why he can never love you the way you deserve to be loved." The silence that followed in the room was deafening. Eleanor looked at Vincent, who had turned as pale as a ghost. "What disease?" she asked softly. Vincent stood up again, but this time he didn't walk to the window. He simply stood in the middle of the room as if gathering courage. "Huntington's," he said finally. "A degenerative neurological disease. Hereditary." Eleanor's world collapsed once more. How long have you known?" "Since I was 25. My grandfather died of it, my father too." Vincent finally looked at her, and his eyes were glistening with unshed tears. "I have a 50% chance of having inherited it." "And do you? Have you?" "I don't know yet. The symptoms usually appear between 35 and 45. I'm already 42. Eleanor stood up, walking toward him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I didn't want you to stay with me out of pity, and because—" he hesitated. "Because there are times when I have strange episodes, memory lapses, excessive irritability, involuntary movements. I still don't know if it's stress or the onset of the disease." "Vincent." "That's why I never truly married Isadora. That's why I always kept an emotional distance from all women." He touched her face gently. "Until you showed up and changed everything." The detective cleared his throat discreetly. I'm sorry to interrupt this moment, but there is one more thing I need to show you. He took a small audio recorder from his folder. We found this in Isadora's room, a recording made on the night she died. He pressed play, and Isadora's voice filled the room, clear and determined. Vincent, if you are hearing this, it means I couldn't live with the certainty that you would never love me. But before I go, I want you to know that I didn't do this for love. I did it for revenge. Eleanor St. James is not who you think she is. She has secrets too, Vincent. Secrets I discovered and for which I have left clues for you to find. Look in her room. Look among the things she brought. And when you discover the truth about why she really came here, you will understand that the two of us are more alike than you ever imagined. The recording continued, but now Isadora's voice sounded different, more fragile. I loved you, Vincent, in my own twisted, possessive way, but I loved you. And if I can't have you, at least I will ensure you are never happy with her, because I discovered something she has been hiding for years, something that will prove she is just as calculating as I have always been. The recording ended, and a heavy silence filled the room. What secrets? The detective asked, looking directly at Eleanor. I don't know, she replied, but her voice sounded unconvincing even to herself. I have no idea what she's talking about. Vincent studied her intently. Eleanor, is there anything you haven't told me? Anything at all about why you really agreed to come work here? Eleanor hesitated. There was one thing she hadn't mentioned, something that had always bothered her, but that she tried to justify as a coincidence. There is one thing, she finally admitted. What? The referral I received to come work here, it didn't just come from an art gallery. She took a deep breath. It came with a cash advance, a very generous advance which arrived exactly when I was financially desperate. How much money? Vincent asked. $50,000. The detective raised his eyebrows. That's well above the normal rate for a restoration, isn't it? It's 3 times more than I would normally charge for a job of this type, Eleanor admitted, suddenly feeling exposed. But I desperately needed the money. My aunt had just died, leaving huge medical debts that I had taken on. I was about to lose my apartment. And you didn't question where so much money was coming from? Vincent asked, but his voice didn't sound accusatory, just surprised. I did, but I was told it was an anonymous client, someone who highly valued restoration work and wanted to ensure the chosen professional could dedicate themselves fully to the project. Isadora, Vincent murmured. She found out about your financial difficulties and used it to ensure you would accept. But that doesn't mean Eleanor was being mercenary, the detective observed. It just means she was in a vulnerable situation that was exploited. Still, it changes things, Vincent said, moving slightly away from Eleanor. It changes the nature of why you are here. Vincent, no. Eleanor stepped toward him. Yes, I needed the money, but after I got here, after I really got to know you, none of that matters anymore. How can I know that? How can I be sure you're not just here for the money? Because if it were just for the money, I would have left the moment you proposed that strange arrangement. Because if it were just for the money, I wouldn't have spent all night thinking about you. Because if it were just for the money, I wouldn't be falling in love with a man who just told me he might be developing a degenerative disease. The words came out with more force than she intended, echoing through the room. Vincent stared at her, as if trying to see into her soul. You're falling in love with me? I am, she answered without hesitation. Against all logic, against all the complications our story carries, I am falling. In love with you. The detective closed his folder, clearly uncomfortable with the intimacy of the moment. Well, he said, based on everything I've heard today, I believe Isadora Montclair's death was indeed a suicide, motivated by an elaborate revenge plot that ultimately failed. He stood up. But I recommend you both be very careful. Desperate people sometimes leave traps that only activate after their death. After the detective left, Vincent and Eleanor remained alone in the living room, the weight of the revelations hanging between them like a storm cloud. What now? Eleanor finally asked. Vincent approached her slowly, as if approaching a wild animal that might flee at any moment. Now I need to know if you can love a man who might not have much time, he said softly. A man who could start to deteriorate at any moment, who could become a shadow of who he is today. Eleanor held his face in her hands. Vincent, everyone dies. Some from illness, some from accidents, others simply from old age. She forced him to meet her gaze. The difference is that you know you might not have as much time as most people. That doesn't make you less worthy of love, it makes you more precious. You don't understand what you're saying. Huntington's is devastating. If I have the disease, I will lose control of my movements, my speech, my ability to think clearly. I will become someone you won't recognize. And what if you don't have the disease? What if it's just the stress and emotional pressure of carrying this fear for so many years? Vincent smiled sadly. And what if it's not? Then we'll face it together. She moved closer until their lips almost touched. Vincent, I've spent my whole life searching for something I didn't even know what it was. Now I've found you. I've found this connection that transcends anything I've ever felt before. Do you think I'm going to give that up for fear of the future? In response, Vincent kissed her with a desperate intensity, as if trying to convey through touch everything he couldn't express with words. Eleanor responded with equal passion, her hands exploring the tense muscles of his back, the strong line of his jaw. When they parted, they were both breathing heavily. There's something I didn't tell you about the episodes, Vincent said against her lips. What? They happen mostly when I get very emotionally agitated. Too much anger, too much fear, or, he paused, too much passion. As if his words had been a prophecy, Eleanor noticed a subtle tremor in his left hand. Is it happening now? Vincent tried to hide his hand, but she held it firmly. It's just stress, he said, but his voice sounded unconvincing. Or it's what you feel for me, Eleanor observed softly. Vincent, if our connection is triggering your symptoms, maybe that's not a coincidence. What do you mean? Maybe your body is reacting to the intensity of what you're feeling because it's been years since you've allowed yourself to truly feel anything. She kissed the palm of his trembling hand. Maybe you need to learn to accept intense emotions without fighting them. And what if it's more than that? Then we'll find out together. That night, Eleanor lay in her room, her mind spinning with everything she had discovered. The revelation about Vincent's illness had changed her perspective on many things, but it hadn't diminished what she felt for him. If anything, it had intensified her need to be near him, to cherish every moment they had together. But Isadora's final words also echoed in her mind. What other secrets did the dead woman believe Eleanor was hiding? She mentally reviewed her entire life, every decision she had made, every relationship she had had, trying to identify anything that could be interpreted as calculating or mercenary. Around midnight, she heard footsteps in the hall. She thought it might be Vincent, perhaps coming to find her, and her heart quickened. But the footsteps stopped in front of the door to what had been Isadora's room. Curious, she quietly opened her door and peeked down the hall. No one was there. But the door to Isadora's room was ajar, and a faint light emanated from within. Against her better judgment, Eleanor walked to the door and looked inside. The room was empty, but there were papers scattered on the bed, papers that definitely hadn't been there when she had visited the room that morning. She entered and examined the documents. They were photocopies of newspaper articles, stories about herself over the years. Some were about important restorations she had completed, others about awards she had won. But there were also more personal articles, about her mother's death, about the financial difficulties she had faced, even about relationships that had ended. In the middle of the papers there was a photograph that made her gasp. It was herself, around 25, embracing a man she recognized as Robert Miller, an influential politician who had been her client years earlier. The photograph had been taken at a social event, but the way they were positioned could easily be interpreted as intimate. On the back of the photograph was a note in Isadora's handwriting. Relationship with married man, influential politician. Lasted 6 months. She knew he was married. Eleanor felt nauseous. Yes, she had been involved with Robert. But she hadn't known he was married. He had lied about it. and when she discovered the truth, she ended the relationship immediately. But looking at the photograph through the eyes of someone who didn't know the context, she could see how the situation could be interpreted negatively. There were more photographs, more evidence that Isadora had collected throughout her investigations. Each one showed Eleanor in situations that, taken out of context, could paint her as an ambitious and unscrupulous woman. "Found what Isadora wanted you to find." Eleanor turned quickly. Vincent was at the door, watching her with an unreadable expression. "Vincent, I can explain." "Can you?" He entered the room and picked up one of the photographs. "Because it's starting to look like there's a lot more about your life that you haven't told me. These photographs, they don't tell the whole story." "Then tell me the whole story." And there, in the room that had belonged to a dead woman who could still manipulate their lives from beyond the grave, Eleanor began to tell Vincent about every photograph, every relationship, every questionable decision she had made over the years, because she knew that if they wanted a real chance to be together, there could be no more secrets between them. Not his, not hers, and not the ones Isadora had tried to create. The truth, however painful, was the only thing that could free them from the web a dead woman had woven around their hearts. The early morning in Isadora's room stretched on for hours as Eleanor bared her soul to Vincent, revealing every secret that the malicious investigations had uncovered and twisted. He sat in the armchair by the window, listening in silence, his eyes never leaving her face as she explained each photograph, each compromising situation Isadora had documented. "Robert Miller," Eleanor began, holding the photograph that shamed her the most. "I was 25. I had just opened my own studio. He hired me to restore some pieces in his private home." She took a deep breath. "He told me he was divorced. For 6 months I believed we were in a serious relationship. When I found out he was married, that his wife was living in Europe for medical treatment, I ended it immediately." "But the photograph suggests intimacy," Vincent observed, his voice devoid of judgment. "Because it was taken at the last event. We attended together before I knew the truth." Eleanor set the photograph aside. "Isadora investigated our breakup, found out about the expensive gifts he gave me, the trips. To an outsider, it looks like I was a gold-digging mistress who knew the situation from the start." Vincent picked up another photograph, this one showing Eleanor on a luxury yacht, accompanied by an older businessman. "And this one?" "Ferdinand Croft, owner of one of the largest construction firms in New York. That was 3 years ago." Eleanor sat on the bed, hugging her knees. "I was restoring a mural in one of his commercial buildings. He started pursuing me, insisting on dinners, gifts. I refused all his advances, but he was persistent." "And the yacht?" "He organized a party to celebrate the completion of the restoration and told me it would be a professional event, with other artists and clients. When I arrived, I discovered it was just the two of us." Eleanor closed her eyes, remembering the discomfort of that situation. "I spent the entire trip trying to keep my distance, making excuses to stay on the upper deck while he drank in the main salon. But Isadora got photographs that make it look like we were intimate." Vincent continued to examine the documents, finding more evidence of Eleanor's supposed calculating nature. There were receipts for expensive gifts, travel records, even snippets of conversations recorded without her knowledge. "How did she get all this?" he asked. "Money buys a lot. Household staff, drivers, even resentful ex-boyfriends." Eleanor stood and walked to the window, watching the first light of dawn paint the bay in gold. "She created a complete file on my life, interpreting every kind gesture or gift I received as evidence that I was a woman who used men for social climbing." "And did you ever?" The question was asked softly without accusation, but it still cut Eleanor like a blade. "Never consciously," she replied. "Accepting a dinner from a client, allowing someone to pay for a trip, receiving gifts. At the time, they seemed like natural gestures from people who valued my work. Only now, seeing it through Isadora's distorted perspective, can I see how those actions could be misinterpreted." Vincent stood and walked to her, stopping right behind her. She could feel the warmth of his body, the familiar scent that was already starting to feel like home. "Eleanor, look at me." She turned and he held her face in his hands. "I don't care about any of this," he said firmly. "I don't care if you accepted gifts, if you had complicated relationships, if you made decisions you now regret. We've all done things we're not proud of. But Isadora was right about one thing, Eleanor whispered. I came here because I desperately needed money. If the offer hadn't been so generous, I might never have accepted. And why should I care about that? Vincent smiled for the first time since they had found the photographs. Fate uses the tools it has at its disposal. If Isadora used your financial needs to bring us together, then she inadvertently gave us the greatest gift we could ever receive. Even knowing I was vulnerable, that I might not have made the best choices. Especially because of that. Vincent tilted his head and gently touched her lips with his. Because it means we are two imperfect human beings who found each other at the right time. The kiss started softly, but quickly intensified. All the night's revelations, all the emotional tension, all the pent-up need channeled into that contact. Vincent's hands found Eleanor's hair, and she pressed against him, feeling as if she could finally breathe after hours of holding her breath. "Vincent," she whispered against his lips, "take me away from this room. Take me anywhere that doesn't carry Isadora's ghosts." Without a word, he lifted her into his arms and carried her out of the room, down the stairs to the ground floor. The house was silent, bathed in the golden light of dawn filtering through the colonial windows. He took her to the library, a room she had not yet fully explored, and gently set her on her feet before the fireplace where embers still glowed. "This was my favorite room as a child," he said, lighting a few strategically placed candles. "I used to hide here when my parents fought, when the world outside seemed too complicated." The library was cozy and intimate, with floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with old volumes, comfortable leather armchairs, and Persian rugs that muffled every sound. There was a timeless quality to the space, as if the problems of the outside world couldn't penetrate its walls. "It's perfect," Eleanor said, moving closer to him again. This time, when they kissed, it was without haste, without the desperate urgency of their previous moments. Vincent explored her lips as if memorizing every curve, every taste, and Eleanor melted into his arms, finally allowing herself to fully feel everything she had been denying for weeks. His hands found the hem of her blouse, and she didn't protest as he slowly lifted it, revealing the pale skin that contrasted with the golden candlelight. He traced the line of her neck with his lips, moving down her collarbone, drawing soft sighs that echoed through the silent library. "Are you sure?" he asked, pulling back slightly to look at her. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she replied, beginning to unbutton his shirt. They made love there, before the fireplace, on the soft Persian rug, with the urgency of two hearts that had waited decades to find each other. It was intense and gentle at the same time, passion mixed with tenderness, desire tempered with reverence. Vincent whispered her name as if it were a prayer, and Eleanor discovered that making love with him was like finally coming home after a lifetime of wandering aimlessly. When they grew quiet, intertwined before the dying fire, Eleanor traced lazy circles on Vincent's bare chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart against her palm. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now we find out if we can build something real, despite all the obstacles Isadora created for us." Vincent stroked her hair, which was spread over his shoulder like golden silk. "And we find out if you can handle a man who might not have as much of a future as we'd like." "Vincent, about your illness." "Huntington's," he corrected gently. "You can call it by its name. Have you sought treatment? Had more specific tests done?" "I've been avoiding doctors for years." He paused. "I think I'd rather not know. But not knowing doesn't make the disease go away, does it?" "No, but it allows me to live as if it doesn't exist." Eleanor pushed herself up, resting on her elbow to face him directly. "What if we do this together? The tests, the treatments, whatever is necessary." "Eleanor, you don't understand what you're offering to do. If I have Huntington's, I will progressively deteriorate. I'll lose the ability to move normally, to speak clearly, to think lucidly. There is no cure. But there are treatments that can slow the progression. There are ways to maintain quality of life for longer." She touched his face gently. And there's the possibility you don't even have the disease. The tremors you have could be caused by stress, anxiety, fear. And what if it's not stress? Then we'll face it the way people who love each other do, together, one day at a time, enjoying every good moment we have. Vincent stared at her for long seconds, as if trying to find any sign of hesitation in her eyes. "Do you really love me?" "I love you," she confirmed, without hesitation. "I love your intensity, your vulnerability, the way you look at me as if I'm something precious. I even love your fears, because they show me you're human." "I love you too," he said, and there was surprise in his voice, as if he were discovering he was capable of feeling something he thought was lost forever. "Since that party 20 years ago, I've carried your image with me, but now, knowing the real you, I've discovered I fell in love not with the fantasy, but with the real woman." They kissed again, and this time there was a promise in their touch, a silent commitment to face whatever the future held together. That's when they heard it, a soft, almost imperceptible sound, like someone dragging their feet on the floor above. Then, what sounded like a door closing. Vincent tensed. "Marcus doesn't stay here at night," he said, sitting up, "and Dolores has her own house on the property." "It could be the wind," Eleanor suggested, but her voice sounded unconvincing. The sound repeated, more clearly this time. Distinct footsteps in the second-floor hallway, moving toward what had been Isadora's room. Vincent got up and started dressing, quickly. "I'll go check." "I'm going with you." "Eleanor." "No." She also stood, looking for her clothes. "We're not separating now. If there's someone in this house, we face them together." They went up the stairs silently, Vincent in front, shielding Eleanor with his body. The sounds had stopped, but a strange, cold draft was blowing through the second-floor hall, making the curtains dance despite the windows being closed. When they reached Isadora's room, they found the door wide open, and inside the papers they had left scattered on the bed were arranged differently. They now formed a sort of circular pattern, with the photograph of Eleanor and Robert at the center. "That's not possible," Eleanor whispered. Vincent entered the room carefully, examining the new arrangement of the documents. "There's a pattern here," he said, "as if someone is trying to show us something." Eleanor came closer and studied the layout of the papers. There was indeed a logic to the organization. The oldest photographs were on the outer edge of the circle, and as they moved toward the center, the images became more recent. In the absolute center, besides the photograph with Robert, there was something new, a letter that definitely had not been there before. Vincent picked it up and read it aloud. "If you are reading this, Vincent, it means you have found my last gift to you both. I brought you together for revenge, but I now realize that true love can bloom even from the most poisoned soil. Eleanor, you are not the calculating woman I thought you were. You are just a woman who has made imperfect choices, as we all do. And Vincent, you are not the cold, distant man you pretended to be. You deserve each other. But there is one last truth. You need to know. The disease Vincent fears may not be real. The symptoms he experiences were induced. For years through Marcus, I added small amounts of medication to Vincent's food and drinks. Medications that mimic the early symptoms of Huntington's. Why? Because I wanted to ensure he would never truly marry me or any other woman. I wanted to keep him isolated, available only to me. Marcus did not know what he was doing. I told him they were vitamins prescribed by a private doctor. He never suspected a thing. Vincent, you probably do not have Huntington's. Your symptoms should disappear in the coming weeks, now that you are no longer being medicated. This is my true revenge against myself, giving you the happiness that I denied all three of us for all these years. With my final regrets, Isadora." The silence that followed the reading of the letter was absolute. Eleanor looked at Vincent, seeing shock and realization spread across his face. "She drugged me," he whispered. "For years, she made me believe I was developing my father's disease." "But how did this letter get here? How did the papers rearrange themselves?" Vincent shook his head, clearly stunned. I don't No, maybe Marcus put it here, following instructions Isadora left behind. Maybe... He hesitated. Maybe this house really does have a memory of its own, as I've always suspected. Eleanor wrapped her arms around Vincent, feeling the tremor that ran through his body. This time not from disease symptoms, but from pure emotion. "You're free," she whispered. "You can have the future you've always wanted." "We can have the future we've always wanted," he corrected, holding her close. But even as they embraced, they both knew there were still mysteries in Beaumont Manor that had not been fully resolved. The house continued to whisper secrets through its walls, and they had the feeling that their true love story was just beginning, because discovering there were no medical or family obstacles to their love was only the first step. Now they had to learn to live that love, to build a future together on the ashes of the past that had nearly destroyed them. And somewhere in that house full of memories, the spirit of Isadora, if spirits indeed existed, seemed finally at peace, having given Vincent and Eleanor the gift she herself could never receive, the chance for a true and free love. 3 weeks had passed since the discovery of Isadora's final letter, and Beaumont Manor seemed to breathe differently, as if the house, finally freed from the secrets that haunted it, could relax and allow happiness to flourish within its centuries-old walls. Eleanor had thrown herself into her restoration work with renewed passion, each brushstroke not only returning color to the old paintings, but symbolically healing the wounds that time had left on the very soul of the property. The main hall's wall paintings came to life again under her expert care. The weeping angels regained their golden tears, and the Baroque cherubs smiled once more with the innocence of centuries past. Vincent, for his part, seemed a completely transformed man. The tremors that had plagued him for years had gradually disappeared, confirming the suspicions revealed in Isadora's posthumous letter. Without the subtle poison that Marcus had unwittingly administered in his meals, his body could finally display its true health. More importantly, the shadow of fear he had carried about a possible degenerative disease had dissipated, freeing him to love without reservation. "The difference is astounding," Dolores commented one afternoon while serving tea to Eleanor on the veranda. "Mr. Vincent smiles. Now truly smiles." Eleanor looked through the window and saw Vincent working in the garden, trimming the majestic palmetto trees with an energy she had never seen in him before. There was something almost youthful in his movements, as if he were rediscovering the pleasure of simply being alive. "Dolores," Eleanor said, placing her cup on its saucer, "may I ask you a question about Marcus?" The older woman's expression grew cautious. "What kind of question?" "Did you know about the medication? About what Isadora was doing?" Dolores sighed deeply, her hands clenching her apron. "I suspected something was wrong. Especially in the last few months before her death," she admitted. "Marcus started asking strange questions about Mr. Vincent's eating habits, about when he ate and drank. But when I questioned Isadora, she said they were just vitamins prescribed by a specialist in New York." "And you believed her?" "I wanted to believe her." Dolores sat in the chair next to Eleanor. "Isadora could be manipulative, but I never imagined she was capable of something so cruel. To poison someone slowly." She paused. "That is pure evil. Where is Marcus now?" "He left a week ago, after Mr. Vincent confronted him about the situation. He wasn't fired. Mr. Vincent understood that Marcus was also a victim of Isadora's manipulation, but he couldn't stay here any longer, carrying the guilt for what he had unknowingly done." Eleanor nodded in understanding. The discovery that he had been an unwitting instrument in Isadora's plan to keep Vincent isolated and ill must have been devastating for Marcus. "There is something else you need to know," Dolores continued, lowering her voice. "About the strange phenomena you've been experiencing in the house. The papers that rearrange themselves, the doors that open and close, that and more." Dolores looked around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. This house has a long history of unexplained manifestations, especially at times of great emotional turmoil. "Are you saying the house is haunted?" "I'm saying that some houses absorb the emotions of those who live in them over the centuries. This house has seen many impossible loves, many tragedies, many secrets, It reacts to those energies. Eleanor remembered Vincent's words about the house having its own memory. And now that true love has finally been allowed to flourish here, that the secrets have been revealed and the lies undone, the house seems more peaceful. Dolores smiled. It's as if it can finally rest. That evening, Eleanor and Vincent had dinner on the veranda, watching the sun set over the Charleston Bay. The intimacy between them had grown naturally over the weeks, without rush or pressure. They had learned to know each other not just as lovers, but as partners, sharing dreams, fears, and hopes for the future. I received an interesting call today, Vincent said, pouring wine for them both. From whom? From the National Endowment for the Arts. They want to turn the manor into a center for the preservation of colonial art. He paused, watching her reaction. With you as the technical director. Eleanor almost dropped her glass. They offered me the position? They offered it to us. The project would be a partnership between the foundation, the Beaumont family, and you. Vincent leaned forward. It would mean transforming this house not just into a museum, but into a living center for restoration and teaching. That's a dream, Eleanor whispered, trying to process the magnitude of the offer. But what about you, your business in New York? I've discovered I can manage everything remotely. And I've also discovered that I much prefer being here with you than lost in the chaos of the city. Vincent took her hand. Eleanor, it's time for me to ask you a question I've been rehearsing for weeks. Her heart quickened, sensing what was coming. Vincent stood from his chair and, to her surprise, knelt beside the table. From his pocket he took a small velvet box. Eleanor St. James, the woman who restored not only the paintings in this house, but my ability to love, my faith in the future, my very soul. He opened the box, revealing a delicately crafted diamond ring. Will you marry me? The tears that streamed down Eleanor's face were of pure happiness. Yes, she whispered, extending her trembling hand. Yes, I will. Vincent placed the ring on her finger, and as he stood to kiss her, Eleanor was certain she heard the house sigh in contentment around them, as if, at last, its function of housing impossible loves had been replaced by celebrating a love that had transcended all obstacles. 2 months later, on a sunny May morning, the Colonial Chapel in Charleston was decorated with wildflowers and filled with guests who had come from all over the country to celebrate the wedding of Vincent Beaumont and Eleanor St. James. Dolores wept silently in the front pew, radiant to see the man she had helped raise finally find happiness. Eleanor's friends and professional colleagues mingled with New York's business elite, creating a celebration that was at once elegant and warm, formal and intimate. But it was when Eleanor walked down the chapel aisle wearing the lace dress that had belonged to her great-grandmother that Vincent felt the last piece of ice around his heart melt completely. She was radiant, not just for her physical beauty, but for the happiness that emanated from every pore. "Do you take this woman to be your wife?" the priest asked. "To love and to cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do," Vincent answered, his voice firm and clear, filled with a certainty that echoed through the walls of the historic chapel. "And do you, Eleanor, take this man to be your husband, to love and to cherish, in joy and in sorrow, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Eleanor looked into Vincent's eyes and saw reflected there the entire future they had dreamed of together. She saw the art center they would create at the manor, the students they would teach, the works they would restore. She also saw the children they hoped to have, running through the gardens of the house, filling the halls with a laughter that had not echoed there for decades. "I do," she said, and the word came out like a song of victory. As they kissed as husband and wife, sealing not only their own lives but definitively healing the wounds that had haunted Beaumont Manor. For generations the chapel bells began to ring in celebration, and somewhere in the dimensions where departed souls dwell, Helen St. James smiled, seeing her daughter finally find the true love she herself had briefly experienced with Edward Smith. Augustus Beaumont, the patriarch who had loved Helen but never possessed her, silently blessed the marriage that finally united the two lineages he had always wished to see connected. And even Isadora Montclair, finally freed from the bitterness that had poisoned her last years, could find peace knowing that her final act had been to give Vincent and Eleanor the gift she herself had never been able to accept. The wedding reception lasted late into the night at Beaumont Manor, now transformed into a palace of light and music. The gardens that had witnessed so much pain over the centuries filled with laughter and celebration, as if nature itself were commemorating the union that brought healing to a place that had known only love's tragedies. When they were finally alone, it was past 3 in the morning. Vincent carried Eleanor through the same hall where they had first met, up the stairs toward the master bedroom, no longer the blue guest room, but the marital suite they had redecorated together. "Mrs. Beaumont," he whispered against her lips as he gently laid her on the canopy bed that had belonged to 5 generations of his family. "Mr. Beaumont," she replied, smiling as she began to unbutton his tuxedo vest. They made love that night, with a tenderness and passion that seemed to transcend the physical, as if their souls were merging to create something entirely new. It was a union that went beyond desire. It was the celebration of 2 people who had finally found a home in each other. 6 months later, in the golden autumn of Charleston, the Beaumont St. James Center for Colonial Art Preservation was officially inaugurated. The manor had been carefully restored to combine the preservation of its historic architecture with the modern needs of a study center. The restoration studios occupied the former outbuildings, transformed into bright, technologically advanced spaces. The Colonial Library had become a classroom where Eleanor taught restoration techniques to students from across the country. The room that had been Isadora's was converted into a memorial for victims of abusive relationships, a way to transform suffering into an instrument of healing for others. And the top floor, room which had remained locked for so long, was opened and transformed into Vincent and Eleanor's joint office, with a commanding view of the entire property. There, where Isadora had met her tragic end, cultural preservation projects that would radiate throughout the country were now being planned. "Sometimes I still can't believe all of this is real," Eleanor said one afternoon, as she watched a group of students working on the restoration of a Baroque altarpiece in the courtyard. Vincent came up behind her, wrapping her in his arms and resting his chin on her shoulder. "It's real," he murmured, into her ear. "We are real. Our love is real. And the future we are building together is more real than anything I have ever dreamed of." Eleanor turned in his arms, noticing how his eyes shone with a happiness that seemed inexhaustible. "Vincent, I need to tell you something." "What?" she smiled, placing his hand on her belly. "We're going to need a nursery." For a moment, Vincent just stared at her, processing what she had said. Then his face lit up with a joy so intense that Eleanor thought he might burst with happiness. "You're," he began, "pregnant." 2 months. Vincent lifted her into his arms and spun her around the office, both of them laughing like children. When he set her back down, there were tears of joy in his eyes. "A baby," he whispered in wonder. "Our child will grow up here, in this house filled with love instead of sorrow." "Our child will only know the happy version of this story," Eleanor agreed, touching her belly where a new life was beginning to bloom. And so, on a golden autumn afternoon in Charleston, as students worked in the gardens and the sound of laughter echoed, through the manor's halls, Vincent and Eleanor Beaumont St. James planned the future of the child, who would definitively seal the transformation of that house from a mausoleum of lost loves into a home of hope and joy. The restoration was complete, not just of the paintings and the architecture, but of the very hearts that inhabited the place. Beaumont Manor, which for so long had been a witness to tragedy, could finally pride itself on housing a true, lasting love, capable of healing the wounds of the past and building a radiant future. And on the centuries-old walls, among the restored paintings and family portraits, a new story was beginning to be written, the story of Vincent and Eleanor, 2 hearts that found in each other not only love, but the redemption of all the impossible loves that had inhabited that place before them. Because sometimes, when the stars align just right and fate decides to be generous, True love doesn't just conquer all obstacles, it transforms everything around it, healing not only the people who love, but also the places that bear witness to that love. And Beaumont Manor, finally at peace, whispered its blessing through the wind that danced, among the majestic palmetto trees, promising to protect and bless the love that had restored its soul.